I'll start by saying you don't even have to be a believer in AI to care about this if you're running a company, because at the end of the day, your customers are also consumers and they are using ChatGPT, Gemini, and all the other AI assistants that are out there. And so they're getting used to having these magical experiences. So it's becoming actually just table stakes for you to have these kind of magical experiences in your product too. So that's one way we think about it. And then I think you just alluded to it, but a couple of days ago, OpenAI, announced some of their endeavors in terms of making more of an app platform. I think others will follow, and I think we look at it as an opportunity to reach users as well, and to grow. So you want to be early on these sort of platforms. I mean, think about the push with mobile apps, which you were a pioneer of, right? You want to have like the great app early on the App Store. And have the first users.
This is Founder Mode. I'm Jason Shafton.
Kevin Henriksen.
And we're going to get started. So you are probably here not to see us, but to see these two guys that are coming out. So Kevin, why don't you introduce our first guest?
So our first guest is Max Mullen, founder of Instacart, co-founder of Instacart. It's funny because this co-founder thing's funny because like JJ is my co-founder, he sits back there. And whenever I put founder, he always goes, the first edit he makes is CO dash. And I'm like, bro, like I can be the founder. He's like, no, you're the co-founder.
Yeah, you're a co-founder.
And so it always makes me like feel a little smaller when I see that in Google Apps. Like I see the little edit, but.
Well, Max is co-founder of Instacart.
Well, Max is the real founder.
Yeah.
Founder of Instacart, co-founder of Instacart. And, I got to know him a bunch when I worked at Instacart. And so excited to have him here today. And then
here we have Andrew, who is co-founder of Airtable and is also, OG SF tech scene. So we are very, very lucky to have these two gentlemen here who built two companies that have really shaped how we all live and work. One has changed how we got groceries, and the other changes how we do business. And forget Excel, you need Airtable. Come on in, guys.
Let's go. Let's go.
What's up?
What's up?
Thanks for having us.
So it's cozy. Nobody has said anything, but we drove this in here today, and we thought this would be a nice way to set the vibe. So what do you guys think? Is it working?
I was in a meeting in that room, and then
You're good.
And then I got out of the meeting, and there was a Cybertruck in here.
Yeah.
I was like, what happened?
Yeah.
So it's funny, like last night he was showing me the pictures of the space because I hadn't actually been here, which is embarrassing to say. But I saw this door, and I was like, is that a garage door? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, can you guys back the truck in and just park the truck, and we'll do the podcast in the back of the truck? And he's like, whoa.
Yeah, Kevin wanted us to be in the truck bed.
And he's like, that's not going to work.
It's a little
he's like,
cozy.
I don't think Max is going to let us bring it in. And I was like, well, just ask him when you get here. And then they got it in.
Max is a nice guy.
You guys are very persuasive.
This guy especially.
I like it.
So guys, let's just rock and roll into this. You both have started these formative, really important companies in SF Tech, one of which is now publicly traded. So congratulations on an IPO, Max, and Airtable. Hopefully we'll see that in the future. Andrew, so let's maybe get into like origin stories. Do you guys want to share the beginning? There's some crazy stories I know you've experienced from your early Instacart days, but I think there's one story in particular that you wanted Max to tell in this if he's able to.
Yeah, I wanted to know about, there was like a Trader Joe's thing. Like I always, like my wife and I were like, why can't we get groceries on Trader Joe's? And I was like, no, there's a story behind it. But there's even a crazier story of that was the first store on Instacart, if I'm not mistaken.
The famous Trader Joe's story. Yeah. So you're right, Kevin. Of course, we tell this story. I tell this story every Monday in orientation to this day. But in the very early days of Instacart, we did not have any partnerships with any retailers because we were very brand new, and grocery e-commerce, it was pretty nascent, and so a lot of retailers weren't even thinking about it yet. And we were launched. We had some early users in San Francisco. And a lot of the groceries came from a local conventional store, but we didn't talk about which store. And we would poll our users, and they would tell us, well, I really love shopping at Trader Joe's. And we would say, well, that's like not what's on our platform. It's sort of these other items. Can you see if you can find, a substitution for those favorite items? And they would say, no, I gotta have those specific cookies from Trader Joe's, right? So I said, if there's a lot of users that won't use Instacart unless their favorite retailer is on our platform, we better go figure out how to partner with those retailers. But of course, in the early days, it was very hard to strike partnerships with retailers who weren't thinking about grocery e-commerce, and particularly who maybe wouldn't want to partner with a very small early startup. And so one day I went into the Trader Joe's and started talking to the manager and was sort of asking, do you have a list of everything that you sell? Could you just sort of give us your catalog, right? And then we'll put it online, right? And we'll like, we have this little startup and we'll try to deliver your items to people, and it'll help your store and it'll help our company. And they were like, listen, we don't have a list. First of all, I was like, how do you not have a list, right? When you scan the item, obviously it rings up on the register. So somebody's got a list.
Literally the billion-dollar question.
But they truly didn't have a list, right? And certainly not one that they were going to give us. So I said, well, what if we went into the stores and just sort of started writing things down and taking pictures? Like, how many pictures would we have to take kind of surreptitiously in order to build our own catalog? And the first thing we tried was like taking the pictures, and they didn't really like that. And it was really actually hard to get good quality pictures. Second thing we tried was we just asked them, hey, could we set up in the corner of your store just like a little photo studio, and we'll just like take things gently off the shelf and put it over there and take a picture and bring it back, and like no one will even know we were there.
Also a no.
Absolutely not. I tried it at a different store. The following tactic: I said, I'm a student. I'm doing a project.
The student thing always works. I'm just a student of the game.
I'm doing research in the grocery industry. They were like, sorry, for competitive reasons, you can't do research in our stores. So we tried all these different things, got kicked out of all these different Trader Joe's stores, and eventually went back to the original store, which is on Franklin Street in San Francisco. And we talked to the manager and we said, listen, we're doing this thing. We're trying to build a catalog of everything that you sell in your store. And we would be willing to like buy one of everything in the whole store to do it. And he was like, well, that's interesting. And if you want to do that, you can do that, but don't get in the way of regular customers.
How dare you buy everything in the store and get in the way of
And I was thinking,
customers.
like, I'm about to spend $20,000 in your store. Like, you should be super happy. But I was like, no, of course, we won't get in the way of regular. What's the best way to do that? And he said, well, come early in the day on a Thursday, which was the next day, and we'll kind of like open a checkout lane just for you guys. And I was like, perfect. We'll be back tomorrow morning on the Thursday. So I grabbed a bunch of people. We came back the next day and we bought one of every single thing in the entire store.
What was the total bill?
It was around $20,000. There's 3,000 items in a Trader Joe's. We bought 2,700 of them. We didn't buy the alcohol, and I didn't buy any of the supplements. There's like all these supplements in a Trader Joe's, like a million different supplements of all kinds of crazy things, And I was like, nobody buys those. Now I'm old and I buy those supplements, right?
Yeah.
So we didn't buy the supplement, and 2,700 items. That's a lot of items, it turns out. Your grocery bag from Trader Joe's or any store, you might buy 15 things on average, and it might occupy 2 grocery bags. Okay, so now multiply that by 200. And it's a lot of trips. And so we were back and forth buying stuff from the Trader Joe's for 3 days. Until we got to the...
How'd you fit all that stuff in that tiny tray they pull out? The registry,
tiny tray.
a tiny tray.
There was a lot of grocery bags. I've never seen, you never seen your trunk, how many grocery bags.
And you had a Cybertruck to move it all?
Yeah, no. Well, this is in 2012. This is
Cybertruck.
in December 2012.
Barely Model S.
And so we're stuffing Trader Joe's bags in the back of a Corolla. And other
Founder mode.
Other vehicles, yeah.
Yes.
And driving them over to this photo studio that we rented. And the person who had the photo studio, and we borrowed from him, we were like, how do we take good product photography? And he's like, oh, you have to set it up perfectly. It's going to take you like 20 to 30 minutes to set up each shot. Then you can take the picture. You take a whole bunch of pictures. And we were like, that's like definitely not fast enough. We need to get to like 30 seconds a picture. Mm-hmm. And so we're just slinging groceries into this white background, getting the flash all sorted out. And it took us 3 days to take the photos. And we sent them to some people to cut them out on a white background, right? So they could be perfect and adjust the colors and everything. And we typed up all the names of all the groceries and all the prices and the locations in the store where we found them. We had kind of created our own little Dewey Decimal System of Trader Joe's, like this shelf, this aisle, this height, and all this stuff. And a couple of weeks later, we launched a version of Instacart that had a drop-down menu where you could select between different retailers, and Trader Joe's was listed there. And people really, really loved that, right? They loved seeing the name of the store that they could shop from. They loved seeing the full catalog of their favorite retailer with beautiful photos. And we learned an incredible lesson in that moment, which is that many lessons actually, people have a strong loyalty toward the grocery store that they normally shop at.
Yeah.
People shop at more than one grocery store and they want to see all their favorite stores listed in the same place, right? So a marketplace model was the right model.
When I load up my cart on Instacart, I've got multiple stores. My shopper's hitting, we're trying to get as much stuff as we can on that one trip. It's got to be that way for me, and I have loyalty to Costco. I get a big Costco Instacart order just queued up, ready to go as soon as we're done here.
Yeah.
So let's get into it with Andrew. Max, I love the origin story. I want to hear, Andrew, from you on early Airtable days. What was the kind of insight around the problem that you guys were solving, right? Max just talked about 2,700 different products, and that sounds like a little bit of a database and a table. How many people in this room use Excel, Google Sheets? Just put one arm up for, it's Sheets, people. But it started
Who
out
uses Airtable though?
Yeah, now do you use Airtable? Yeah, everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
So it's a much better version of that, and it's powering so much now. So we'd love to hear, how did you guys get started? Perhaps a fun story of the early days of Airtable.
My co-founder and I were both very into HCI and how do you take things that are really complex, like a database, software creation, and make those really easy for everybody. And I think part of that was born from just our love of being builders and creating software. And also my co-founder, he was at Salesforce. They acquired his previous company. And he saw that most business software is just a database and you have logic and views. It's kind of like reinventing the same wheel every time you build a business application. So the challenge of taking something that's really complicated, this class of software development for businesses, and making that really easy and simple and rounding off all the rough edges was really a big motivation for us. And I spent time before at Google Maps working on the design and really simplifying that interface. So yeah, we had this big vision for how we'd democratize software creation and let people build their own apps, specifically business apps around the database. And to your point, the entry point for us, you kind of come to realize if you study the history of computing, that the spreadsheet was this, really killer application, not just because it is so useful, but it really is programming. And all these people surreptitiously learned how to program by using a spreadsheet. And you start with these really simple primitives like cells, and then you kind of learn that you can write these formulas that reference them. And there are a lot of aspects to it, just the direct manipulation and the very visible aspect of it is kind of like a what you see is what you get interface that we wanted to replicate. So we co-opted that spreadsheet interface and, kind of reuse that to make it easy to build databases, and just started building together. It took us a long time to get to an MVP and get the product out there. I think either because we were not the fastest engineers, but also we were rounding off the rough edges and prototyping and that type of thing. So just kind of a product born from the vision to do that and love of kind of simplifying complex things.
Andrew, how many people told you when you were fundraising for your seed round, oh, Google Sheets will just add these features. You have no chance here?
Oh yeah, we got that a lot. I think we found that there were two types of early customers. Either people got it completely because they understood databases, or they kind of understood software in some form and it clicked for them, or they were kind of Excel or spreadsheet junkies. And they were like, wait, why can't I reference any cell here? How is this different than a spreadsheet? And so I think with that latter class, we definitely got the, hey, this is just Excel or a pure spreadsheet. But I think people that understood software foundations kind of realized that it's a strong foundation to build other things on top of. And definitely that was a common thing for us early on.
What about in those early days, that you guys shortcutted or took hacks on to kind of say man, we'd love to go build the proper version of this, but we're hey, we don't have time or we need to get something out. So when you think about that MVP, were there specific shortcuts that you sort of took where you're then now
go fix it later?
Yeah, came back and either fixed them or they're still kind of survived and that actually ended up being a smart sort of shortcut?
First thing we wanted to de-risk. You can sort of think of startups as a series of things you're de-risking. And for us, the first was, can we actually build something that is easy to use and is a database and has the right UX to make this a much more broadly used product? And so for us, that was the main thing we were trying to do. So we had a purely front end, lived in the browser client product for a long time before we even built a back end.
Interesting.
And so all the prototyping, kind of getting the full feature set just in the browser using local storage is kind of what we worked on initially. We were just building for ourselves, so it kind of worked. As long as we had our laptops, we had our Airtable application.
Did
and
that
it was
ever
good to
ship,
go.
or did you find when you finally kind of turned on real users, you actually had a version?
Yeah, we actually had persistence and a server and like a backend and stuff once we had real users. But while we were kind of de-risking the UX side and prototyping and iterating really fast, I think that let us build a lot faster. And then we were like, oh man, we got to actually build like a real product and a backend and make this like a product, like productionized. But initially, it's just purely front end.
There's a lot of founders in the room, and I think it's worth like double clicking on this. Everybody thinks of Instacart as this product that has all of these retailers and just really works, right? I mean, even when you joined in 2018, we had, we were less mature.
It wasn't that way at the beginning, Max?
Yeah, you're talking about Airtable was like in local storage. That's like your whole product is a database.
Yeah.
Dropbox.
It was just the table, no air.
The first version of
that the first
Dropbox would like lose your files. Like the first shopper app for Instacart was a web page, like a web view. There was no app at all. There's always hacks. At the beginning.
I mean, I think there's got to be a moment, maybe each of you could think of, where you were like, oh, we're not crazy. Like, this is working. Was there like because I remember very distinctly when I started a marketplace company in 2014 in LA, and I was working out of Coloft, which was the first, I think, Instacart office was in that co-working space. And I remember, Instacart, who are these guys? That was when I made my first Instacart order, because it was your second market. And so, when did Instacart like kind of jump the shark for you guys? And you're like, oh, this is a real thing. We're not insane, and it's actually going to work. And I'd love to hear, Andrew, at Airtable when that moment was as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think in Andrew's framing, there's like a series of things you're de-risking.
Right.
The first for Instacart was like, could we even build a 1-hour grocery delivery product? Would it even work? Would we be on time? And we quickly proved that. And then I think another objection we heard from investors and thought about ourselves was like, is this a product just for people in like the coasts in California, New York, or even just in, big cities? And it wasn't until 2016, 2017, 2018 kind of time frame when we started to expand to, all 50 states, a lot of, less large cities, and then even some suburbs where we had a lot of really regular people in America using the product every single week. And then that's when we really knew it was going to be a big household.
Was there like a city where you're like, you always referenced it in meetings? It was like the one
Yeah,
where like, if it's working here, then
funny that you should ask, but some investor at one point just said, listen, this is great if you're in San Francisco or New York, but call me when you have moms in Kansas using it. And then one day I remember we hired an employee and they said, hey, my mom's a big fan of Instacart. And I was like, well, where does your mom live? And she was like, Kansas. And I said, we finally did it.
Did you call the investor?
Achievement unlocked.
Yeah.
Nice. What about you, Andrew?
Kind of similar story. There's a series of these kind of like, oh, this could be something. I think the first was we would start showing the product to our friends. And like I said before, 9 out of 10 would be like, I don't really get this, kind of like a spreadsheet, but not really. But we had a friend who he used to work at Pixar as a engineer. He decided to strike out on his own and be a video producer, like start doing film. And he was shooting a music video. And he showed me this thing called Shot Lister, which is a dedicated iPhone application for tracking like your shots and your crew and your cast, like all the moving parts of the film production. We're like, oh, this is cool. He's like, man, I just wish I could add one field to track like who checked out this piece of equipment. And then we showed him Airtable. It's like, oh, this is amazing. I can actually like build it and customize it. And it had all the functionality from Shot Lister, but it was completely flexible. And so we saw that case, and then another early customer who is a friend of ours ran a nonprofit, and they were about to do a big Salesforce implementation, and they saw it and they were like, oh, I could just use Airtable. This is amazing. I can customize it. So a couple of those individual small team use cases or individuals. And I think the one that really stuck for me later on in more of like a large company, like this could be a big product context, like where there's a lot of, kind of financial value to be had as well, is when I did a customer trip to New York, and we were used to talking to customers over chat or like support email, that type of thing, or even video calls. But I went to visit WeWork at the time, and WeWork was on this, fast trajectory of growth. And I went to their office and I looked, and every computer screen had Airtable on it. And I just thought to myself, like, oh shit, I hope the server doesn't go down. Like, people are actually using this. This is amazing. So seeing a whole company use it, or at least a whole big team, was was huge and really sticks in my head as like a transformational moment.
My wife works for Disney and they're an Airtable customer.
Oh yeah,
she,
of course.
She's like,
awesome.
she loves Airtable. She's
Oh,
obsessed.
awesome. Yeah.
And so that's a pretty big logo.
Yeah, for sure.
There's
This
lots
is
of
a big
those,
one.
right?
Yeah.
How do you think about, I mean, I think that's a good kind of segue to like think about like this notion of speed versus craft, right? Like you early talked about like HCI and like how do we make it beautiful and perfect? And then it's like, okay, now we start moving faster. Like how did you sort of in those early days kind of pick that balance between like move quick, get a bunch of things landed versus like, no, I want to spend the time to kind of sand it and polish it?
Yeah, I think we went through different phases of that. So there was the early prototype phase, get the UX right, just write crappy code, throw stuff out, move really fast. And then at some point we were like, we got to build this in a more robust way. And once we got to that point, you wanted to get the foundational architecture right, just because you're going to build on top of that for a long time. You can't like rip stuff out of customers. Like if they built a Airtable database app, and you remove a field type, it's like, hey, my thing just doesn't work anymore. So we kind of went into more of like a, measure twice mode. And I see that's the Wi-Fi. Oh, I shouldn't say that. And give everybody your Wi-Fi password for workshops.
We'll clip it.
We'll clip
No,
it.
we'll change it.
It's really not that big of a deal.
Okay.
It's because it's one of my personal values.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Measure twice.
Yeah.
So then we had more of a measure twice mode. And I think we went too heavy on that for a long time. It was like, let's get the perfect architecture, kind of inventing from first principles, things around real-time collaboration, which we kind of had to do because in those days, it wasn't as standard of a thing. And, you had like Dropbox sync, but you didn't really have a really complicated kind of like highly, high dependency tree database you'd have to like sync in real time. So we got really deep on like the engineer and, deep engineering, measuring twice, which slowed us down a lot. But I think the pro of that is we were able to hire good engineers because we had hard problems. And I think we could talk intelligently about them because we struggled with them for quite a while. So yeah, it really depends. And then you kind of go through modes where it's build fast, prototype. You're in kind of like a new startup-y, building a new S-curve part of the product and that type of thing. So for us, it kind of went back and forth a lot, but it was tough too because you kind of build a culture around doing something in the measure twice, go slow, be deliberate, cerebral way, and then you have to change and you have to say, we have to prototype more, we have to get stuff out there, we can always like pull it back and so on and so forth. So we kind of struggled sometimes with the pendulum shifting back and forth there.
You mentioned culture, and I want to touch on that because Max, you were one of those people, and you've written a lot about this, and you talk a lot about it, that really helped shape the Instacart culture from you and your co-founders to a lot more people now, and even the culture and thinking about how you bring in shoppers into that in that marketplace. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on taking culture from 3 people in a room to thousands.
When I think about culture, the first thing that I talk about and think about is values. And typically a startup has values, whether they're written down or not. And if they're not written down, they're just the sum of the personal values of the founders of the company. And that's usually how it starts. Like, if you care about craft, then the company will care about craft. And so those were sort of the early values of our company. But then later on, you kind of want to be a little bit more deliberate about your values. You want to write them down, and that's very useful when you're hiring people, right? So you can tell them what your values are, and you can make sure that they're going to be able to live in that culture. And so we've had different sets of values over the years. And just to kind of bring it back to this idea of sort of speed versus quality, like in the early days of Instacart and in the early days of most companies, most of the companies that I invest in, speed is like a huge advantage, right? You want to have like the fastest cycle time you possibly can have, right? Some people, it's a month, it's 2 weeks, it's a week, it's a day, but like the faster the better. If you're shipping stuff every hour and learning stuff every hour, it compounds. So good. And so that was our operating mode, right? When you joined, Kevin, like we were in speed mode. And it was it was woven into the culture at that point. And then when we rewrote the value, and we had a value called every minute counts, right? Literally, one of our 5 values was every minute counts. And then when we rewrote the values in 2021, as we were sort of maturing, we realized we had already achieved that value. And so we had to kind of graduate it and move on to values that spoke more about how we're going to balance things over the long term as a larger company. So it's, to Andrew's point, it's something that evolves. And it's something that you kind of want to be really deliberate and thoughtful about and spend some time on. It's an investment. As a founder, writing values and thinking about your culture is an investment in the future of your company.
For Andrew, for you guys, kind of similar culture question, but maybe take it a step farther. When you think of that culture moving from like the founders to like hiring your first execs, like we kind of before the show were talking like how does a company change as you start bringing in not just like, hey, you're growing a team, but you're now bringing in executives that sort of have to like bring their own culture from their old companies. Like I remember even Instacart, we'd bring in people from like Facebook or Google, and we're like, wait a minute, this is now running in a different way. And you could sort of sense these like cultures that they brought with them. And how did you guys see that at Airtable? And have you seen that sort of impact as the company sort of scaled and grew?
I think the culture, like the most important part of that is making that part of your hiring. And so, just people you bring in are the biggest carriers of your culture. And it kind of seems like that's how it plays out. Like it's not the thing you write in the wall. Like that doesn't really matter too much. Like that does matter, but make sure like the people actually embody that. And so, especially with an executive, to your point, it's like you're amplifying that. They hire people, so on and so forth. So I think for us, like we would try to find a good culture fit, but also like a lot of times you're hiring an executive because you need to change the culture and maybe bring in something different. I think especially with executives, it's kind of like a good way for you to bring in other knowledge and expertise, so on and so forth. So I think, kind of making sure the combination of like having the right culture to fit in with what you're doing, but also bringing, realizing they're bringing in something else, they're going to kind of scale out to the org. And we've kind of played that good and bad, and I think it's never easy to figure out what those values are, but it's pretty critical.
We have a handful of Instacart executives in the room, and one who's on the stage, former one who's on the stage here. I do want, Max, you to tell a funny Kevin story if you have one, because you guys brought him in, and he's a character, and so at some point, he did or said something dumb, and you had to deal with it. You don't have to do it, but I really do want to give Kevin a hard time as much as possible.
It's easy to come up with dumb stuff that Kevin and Jim.
We're trying to find a smart thing. Got it.
I use you as an example sometimes when I'm talking.
He's going to say a nice thing. I can feel it.
To founders about culture, because a lot of the time the instinct is to bring in only people that are like yourselves. And when you joined the company, you represented sort of a different set of values and ideas, and it was very polarizing to some people, including to me. In fact, I hate to say this, and you probably already know, I didn't really like you when you joined the company. You heard. But over time, I began to respect that you just had a different way of operating, and it was a bit more of what we wanted to become, right? A bit more direct, a bit more super high urgency, and you just had a way of managing your team that was just polarizing. And I think it's really important to be able to hire people that are different that have the experience that you want to bring into your company, and that are different than the way the people at the company are used to working. And maybe to think about changing a little bit if toward that direction, if you bring in an executive and they just have another way of doing things.
Yeah, and I think it's funny. So I did have a polarizing view. I still have a lot of polarizing things.
Yeah, you're a lightning rod. I like it.
But there was a thing that Max did that I think is still pretty cool. Like, and you mentioned it earlier in the discussion. You're like every Tuesday or whatever it was, the onboarding day, where like you come in and do like the founder story. Like, every hiring class goes through like Max Day or Max Hour, where you're like, hey, I'm going to talk through this thing. And I think that sort of thread that everybody that joined our team, even people that I hired on my team, still got your sort of view of culture and how that sort of transcended from like day 0 to whatever we were, day 8, year 8, year 10, kind of as we went through it. And I think that piece is something that's a little unique, where I had never seen that before. Cause like, it's doing a small company thing and then getting acquired, you kind of get like indoctrinated in the big company's culture. You go into Microsoft, or we went into Yahoo many years ago, and you would just not have this way to sort of like, oh, what is the culture? Nobody told you. Like, you would just show up and be like, oh, I guess like Microsoft people I always make fun of, because they like always introduce themselves with the number of years they've been at the company. We actually had one on the podcast last week. It'll be out next week. And she's like, yeah, I've been at Microsoft 26 years. And I was like, bro, like, everywhere they go.
I would argue that's a tradition. You know?
It is.
That's a Microsoft. And every company has traditions.
Yeah.
And it is through those traditions that culture propagates from early employees to later employees. And you have to tell people what the traditions are. And you tell them some of the stories of the history of the company, and you share deeper meanings about the values and bring them to life, instead of them just being posters on the wall. And then, of course, you do the other side, like you weave them into your hiring scorecard, your promotion and evaluation scorecards, and you make sure that people know that they're actually things that people are going to be held accountable to, versus just, again, words on the wall.
Yeah. You guys are both, kind of major forces within your companies in terms of product, right? And product leadership. And so I would love to talk about, we are in this moment right now. You can't go to an event at Tech Week. You can't go on to X. You can't go on LinkedIn without just seeing AI. we're in the peak of the hype cycle, maybe not. But I really would love to dig into in the world of Airtable, especially, but I think Instacart as well. There is a lot happening within these companies to try to figure out how to leverage AI to make the products better, to make the user experience better, but also how do you view what's happening right now and what's about to happen as how do you embrace AI within the businesses, and where do you see it going for each of your companies?
I'll make a disclaimer that I'm not too involved in the day-to-day at Airtable, so my knowledge is a bit dated, but I think there's definitely two aspects to the AI thing, and one is just getting people to use AI productively within the organization for all parts of it, all departments, and be more efficient, do better work, so on and so forth. And I think the other part is like, how do you make the product much better? And I think it's I think it's easy to sort of do copycat stuff, and we're in such like an echo chamber. Everybody's like, you got to build an agent, you got to build this chat thing. And I think I don't see as much, at least, in the broader, set of companies I see out there doing really original thinking about like, what does this mean specifically for my business and my customers and the things that matter most and applied to the problem that we work on. So I think we've tried to take a very original approach to it. And I think AI is this really powerful force for software creation. That's always been our goal, is to make software creation accessible. And, with vibe coding these things, it's a huge force multiplier on the sort of very detailed software you can build as a non-developer. So we're kind of taking the sort of Airtable philosophy of like, that's make people, that's give people, expand that superpower with code, but then still give them the foundational pieces, all the building blocks of like a data layer and, governance, permissions, all the sort of interface and logic layers. Like that's kind of combine the superpower of that plus, vibe coding and everything else. But not just sort of like copying what everything is out there. So I think that's where we're at right now.
Max, how about you? I mean, some of the earlier demos I saw in OpenAI was like Instacart kind of on stage with Sam and sort of being part of those demos and being one of those early logos kind of is part of this kind of like as ChatGPT and these things took off. Like, what is your sort of view of how AI has both impacted Instacart, but then maybe a little bit even into some of the startups you're seeing today?
I'll start by saying you don't even have to be a believer in AI to care about this if you're running a company, because at the end of the day, your customers are also consumers and they are using ChatGPT, Gemini, and all the other AI assistants that are out there. And so they're getting used to having these magical experiences. So it's becoming actually just table stakes for you to have these kind of magical experiences in your product too. So that's one way we think about it. And then I think you just alluded to it, but a couple days ago, OpenAI, announced some of their endeavors in terms of making more of an app platform. I think others will follow, and I think we look at it as an opportunity to reach users as well, and to grow. So you want to be early on these sort of platforms. I mean, think about the push with mobile apps, which you were a pioneer of, right? You want to have like the great app early on the App Store. And have the first users.
Yeah. And then how about starting companies today? Like, so it's one thing for like an Instacart or an Airtable to be like, oh, we're going to add AI or transform AI. But how about like, you guys both talk to a lot of founders, have probably done a lot of angel investments. Like, what are you seeing in this sort of like as founders are coming out and starting things today? Like, how are they using AI? And then like, we always talk about like the AI ChatGPT wrapper. But like, what's the real story? Like, where are you actually seeing people kind of innovate?
Well, I got one framework, which is that it used to be the case that the ideal founding team was 2 people or 3 people kind of coming out of a company with an insight about that general business. And the main thing that they had was subject matter expertise that was recent. And then as far as building the company, using technology to build the company, they were doing what everyone else was doing. Today, you have teams of very young founders who are AI native, who have been using agentic coding and cursor and so forth for a year now, who can build things extremely fast and can make up for the fact that they don't necessarily have as much domain expertise. And I think, in my experience, those younger teams are kind of sometimes running circles around the other teams that are kind of doing things in more of a waterfall-y way. So it's a huge advantage to be able to wield these new tools. And I basically now at this point only invest in founders that are doing that.
I like
Yeah,
that.
it might even.
I think you're like Airtable is almost like a platform. I mean, like I think of it, it's the original vibe coding platform, right? And so I'm guessing you're not only seeing like founders build around Airtable, but also the stuff you're seeing outside of it.
Yeah, well, to build on Max's point, like if you're like, you should index high in scrappiness and originality, creativity, and just first principles thinking, I think in this AI era. And I think like even, if you're a young founder, you don't have like a bunch of domain experience or industry experience, could even be an advantage because you'll come at it from a very fresh perspective and you won't be held back by ideas of what this piece of software looks like in the industry or how people do things in existing workflows. It's like you can reinvent from the ground up with this new platform. And to your point, you can learn so quickly. So I think if there's a high degree of, agency and scrappiness and creativity and originality, like you're golden. That's the type of founder you want to invest in.
Let's talk learning. So, you guys have both, I love the kind of view in the media of overnight success, right? Like all of a sudden, Instacart, Airtable, household names, like it just happened one night, but like, that's not true. And so let's talk about the things that happened that, if you each could share that kind of $10 or maybe $10 million mistake, some of your favorite, like, oh man, we really shouldn't have done that moments building these formative companies for this group here, who I saw a bunch of hands go up as founders. Like maybe they can learn from some of your scar tissue in this conversation.
Yeah, there's sort of costly directions and visions you can have. Like one example for us is we spent a long time trying to build a platform, I think, before we were ready to build a platform, in the sense that we built this developer SDK where people can build their own custom apps and release them in a marketplace. But we really didn't have any developers building on, like, writing code on Airtable at that time. So it didn't make a lot of sense to build a marketplace until we actually felt the pull from that audience. So that was an expensive like detour. We built this, it was called the Airtable Blocks platform, I think a bit too early. And it was based on like this vision of, we'll build this thriving ecosystem and there'll be these flywheels and everything else, and just a bit too theoretical. So that was a costly mistake, and probably wasted quite a bit of time. But I think the other side of that is you got to try risky things to succeed and to keep inflecting new growth curves. So, no regrets.
We made our fair share of mistakes, and my overall lesson from those is that when you're in the right market with generally the right approach, you just assume you're going to be wrong. But if your iteration speed and your ability to learn from customer feedback is very strong, and your iteration speed is very high, you make up for it very, very quickly.
Lots of shots on goal.
Lots of shots on goal, and also just many little adjustments that get you that like honing in on a heat-seeking missile towards product market fit. And then once you get there, it's about scaling it, and that's sort of a different chapter. Mainly my lessons from the post product market fit version of Instacart were just not doing things we did sooner. Not partnering with more retailers and being in more geographies and being better at, using advertising as a lever to grow, all those things sooner.
Yeah. How about like kind of the other side, like founder therapy, like control, burnout, like things where you just had to take a break and realize that you kind of hit a wall? And, did that happen at a certain point, or was like a certain inflection thing where you can remember? And then more importantly, like how have you sort of like worked through that, or did you work through that if you hit it?
Yeah. I think thinking through the history of the company, we started in 2012. And so I think we finally got some traction in maybe 2017, 2018. So it was 5 years of just grinding without a lot of validation. We have like our film producer friend or like our nonprofit friend, little pockets of like, hey, this could really click, passionate users. But it was quite a slog. And in some senses, we had the luxury to take our time early on and build good foundations and do what we thought was our best work because we weren't in a hyper competitive space. It's like we didn't have some other company that was building like another Airtable. We had a few that kind of came and went and flamed out, and so on and so forth. But I think it's we sort of had a chance to breathe for the first 5 years of the company, and we were building and doing what we loved. And then you sort of get into the whirlwind of, hey, there's all these customers, you're hiring all these teams, you're hyper scaling, and that phase of the company, which to me, caused a lot more burnout or just like stress, and you're in more reactive mode. I think especially as somebody who's deep on product and engineering, you just kind of want to get your hands into that again, and you're kind of dealing with other stuff in the company. But I think we always had a pretty good balance of like thinking that this is a long-term endeavor. It's going to be at least 10 years if we want to build what we set out to do. So we had that mindset, and as co-founders, we would be forgiving of like, hey, I need to kind of pull back for a little bit. major life milestones would pop up, and we kind of give some slack to one co-founder and so on and so forth. And so I think having those relationships where you can understand the person's personal life and kind of make that space is important as well. I think I did eventually kind of burn out of the hands-on org management side, and I've kind of pulled back to more of a IC role within Airtable and less involved day to day. So maybe Mac's a better one to speak to long-term engagement.
It's similar in the sense that I think you go through different chapters as a founder. Sort of the early days, it's just all hands on deck. 997. Working all the time. Maybe you get the luxury of some scale and a bigger team, and you get to pull back a little bit and be more strategic. I've also gone through the journey of being like a manager of lots of people, and then an IC again, and then a manager again, and just having different functions under me, and just try to keep it interesting and keep learning is my approach to not getting burnout.
I'd love to hear, oftentimes in these conversations, you hear some of the same themes pop up, but give us the most contrarian take, unpopular opinion. You guys have a lot of learnings from building these companies over the years and now investing in other companies. We didn't shout this out, but Max, this is a beautiful space that you guys have built here, and thank you for hosting us in workshops. So
nice Cybertruck.
Yeah, I don't know what jerk drives that thing around, but look, I think it would be interesting to hear kind of that what is something that is maybe uncommon knowledge or an unpopular opinion that you guys have formed over the years that needs to be said in a room of people building and starting new things.
I have like a very specific thing where it's like, go build this thing. And because, I think generally I would encourage people to like read the classics and inject some kind of randomness into their information diet and try to like, go back in time and see what people have tried in the past and what hasn't worked. I think for us in Airtable, a lot of our inspiration came from reading about the history of computing, things like Alan Kay and Hypercard and like the Dream Machine, all that. And I think, most stuff that people build has been tried in the past and people just kind of forget about it. And we're in this new technology wave. And I see a lot of companies kind of doing the same thing. Maybe they're doing slightly different versions of like agents for this vertical and that vertical. There's a ton of opportunity there, but I think like if you can find something, at least for us, like our experience was like being in a very non-competitive space for a long time because we were doing something that nobody else was doing. Everybody else thought it was stupid, which kind of sucked, but it was kind of great too. Yeah. So if you can find something like that and you can build a passion for it, like that's something you should just, work on long-term and have a long time horizon on. And if you persist, you can succeed.
It really shouldn't be contrarian, but I think it's become contrarian that it's a good idea to spend like more than 50% of your time talking to customers. There's a lot of, I was just talking to Jagannath, who was at Instacart for many years, and there's a lot of founders that are building companies because of some hype of some kind, right? It could be what they think people want them to be building. It also could just be like they're building the version of the company that they think they can raise money for, which is not the version of the company that your customers want. And so customer development is just this really hard thing. You have to go and talk to 20 people and then 20 more. And then every week you have to talk to 5 more because it's a continuous process, right? And so a lot of times I've heard from founders who have gone and done some customer meetings, gotten the insight, right? Gone and built the product, shipped it, and then said, well, why isn't it working? It's like, well, no, you have to talk to customers continuously all the time, right? So I just think that's just a lesson I keep having to share with founders. You got to do more customer development.
SF comeback. Like, we've had this sort of like SF is dead. COVID killed it. It's
back,
back.
baby.
AI brought it back. Like, what's your kind of take, each of you, on like what's SF is like? This is tech week. Obviously it's a busy week this week, but I'm curious, like, how you're both seeing that from your perspective.
Yeah, it seems like it's back. And I think, I came here in 2008 and that was, right after the recession and all that. And it was pretty dead, for a while. People working at Google and Meta, and there were some startups, popped up, YC companies and whatnot. But it kind of felt a little bit more like people were here to work and not to live and didn't care about the city that much. And this kind of feels like a renaissance of people who are like, let's make San Francisco an awesome place. And it feels more permanent in some ways in terms of maybe it's like, Gary Tan too, being like an advocate of the city. There didn't used to be that part of like, hey, not only is this the best place to build tech, but this is a great place to live and we can make it a great place to live. So that's been a positive change, I think, from the last kind of build up until maybe, 2018, 2020. And then this time, the flip side of that is I think there is, a lot of companies that will come and go, and we're in like a bit of this bubble. And so it'll be kind of like, at some point the ocean the tide will go out and probably wash out a lot of mercenaries that are just kind of here to make a buck off of AI. But it does feel like there's a positivity and optimism about the city itself and being a resident here that wasn't the case in the past, which I appreciate.
Nice.
I mean, I obviously agree. I think San Francisco is the best place in the world to build a startup, and it's only getting better.
Yeah.
And if you believe that in-person work is important and collaborating with your team in real life is an advantage, and there's only one city you can do that and have everybody be in one place. And I think that's San Francisco. I really actually don't think it ever wasn't. Yeah. I think it had a PR problem for a while, but I think it's a great place to live, and I'm going to be here forever.
Where can folks find you online and connect with you if they want to follow the things that you're sharing and writing about, or where should folks go?
I'm A Ofstad in Twitter, but I don't tweet. Maybe I will someday.
Okay,
let's go.
Yeah.
I'm Max on Twitter.
Wait,
and
like
I also
just
he's
Max?
at Max.
Just Max?
Yeah, he's at Max.
Yeah.
Should we talk about that, or
Dude,
let's
that's
just?
kinda crazy,
Yeah, it's
bro.
kind of
Like
cool.
your
You're not
first
at
name?
Kevin. Nope.
I'm not at Kevin.
Nope.
Yeah, I've been using Twitter since the beginning of Twitter, but I also don't tweet that much. But maybe I will. If you follow me, I'll tweet.
Yeah. If you would get a bunch of subscribers today and new Twitter followers,
both gonna retweet
X followers
the episode,
for
yeah.
for
That's right.
sure. That's going to be the moment your
Smash that
accounts go active.
subscribe button.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, smash it. Like and subscribe. Awesome. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you, Andrew Ofstad. Thank you, Max Mullen. What an incredible conversation. Yeah, so you can clap for them, please. A lot of clapping. This is Founder Mode. Please like, subscribe, smash those buttons, review, tell us who you want to see next time. Max says we can come back now and pull the Cybertruck in, so we're doing it. And my name is Jason Shafton.
Kevin Henriksen.
Thanks for being here, everybody.
See ya.
Thanks for having us.